Hey, hello, everybody. Welcome back from our break. I think we're ready to start with the next panelist, which is going to be Benjamin Garstad. I first want to thank Petros Bouras-Vallianatos for organizing the second Edinburgh Book Festival, Edinburgh Byzantine Book Festival, that is, to be proper. And to the rest of you for joining us. I see a lot of fun, familiar names in the audience, and I don't think anyone I've particularly offended, but let me know if I'm wrong about that. My name is Colin Whiting. I'm the editor of Byzantine Studies at Dumbarton, but I am not here to introduce myself so much as I am here to introduce our speaker. Benjamin Garstad is professor of classics at MacEwan University in Edmonton, Alberta, which is a part of Canada that would make dreary Edinburgh feel downright tropical, especially this time of year. Ben even has a Scottish connection. He earned his PhD from the University of St. Andrews in 2001. And then on his way from Scotland to Edmonton, published literally dozens of articles on subjects ranging from Tertullian and Jerome to Nonnus and Malleus, as well as an edition and translation of the Apocalypse of Pseudo-Methodius, along with the so-called Alexandrian World Chronicle. These kinds of obscure sources are extremely my jam, as one might say, and his most recent book is no different. Let's see if we can get this going. Subject of today's discussion is Bouttios in late antique Antioch, Reconstructing a Lost Historian. You might be forgiven for not recognizing the name Bouttios right off the bat. He's not as famous as other 4th century historians like Eusebius of Caesarea or Ammianus Marcellinus, nor famous like other 4th century Antiochenes like Libanius. His name, the time in which he wrote, even his existence have been called into question. But in this book, Ben undergoes with a blurb on the back of the book, and right here, called an exciting, if laborious, task. He reconstructs with painstaking care everything we could know about Bouttios and his history and the context in which he wrote it. The result is a new window into the pervasive religious conflicts of late antiquity, and particularly as these conflicts informed the very practice of ancient historiography. The book ends by using Bouttios's history as a way to talk about the nature of truth in antiquity, as well as truth in our own times, a subject that becomes more pressing with every year. So with that, I will turn the microphone over to Ben, who will tell us who Bouttios was, what he was up to in Antioch, and how he was reconstructed. Ben.
Thank you very much, Colin. I owe Colin a debt not only for introducing me, but also for preparing these images. You would just be looking at me if it were not for him. And thank you also to Petros. This is a wonderful opportunity. On account of the time, I've only managed to dip into a few sessions, but I'm looking forward to seeing everyone on YouTube. It's a wonderful opportunity to get to know what's happening in our subject. So Colin spent 2 minutes talking, which leaves 18 minutes to me. I'm not sure I have 18 minutes worth of stuff to say, but we'll see. We'll see. This has been an interesting project, and I suppose because it's bound, Colin can confirm it's done, but it's the sort of thing, right? As Colin says, this is an obscure figure, and probably far too close to the end of the project. I did have misgivings. I asked myself, what am I doing? Why am I spending so much time talking about such an obscure figure, figure who's given us such minute fragments and bits and pieces, and I suppose it was too late to stop at that point. But I think that the project itself, I don't know if it's justified itself, but I was given heart recently. I was actually telling Colin that what I'm doing right now is looking over the drafts of a book on lists of ethnonyms in late antiquity by Salvatore Liccardo. And I will confess that I set out to do this because I like Salvatore. And I thought, well, this is not a promising subject, lists of ethnonyms, but I'll do it for him. But no, I will not claim that I've done this as well as he has. But I was not merely impressed. I was amazed at how Salvatore took these indeed obscure and unpromising bits and pieces and wove them into a much broader story, right? By delving into the details, he was able to show how these things that we so often ignore, right? Because they're just lists of people's names, how they fit into these much broader and much more significant cultural and political programs that determined not merely how people at the time thought about the world as a whole, but how people for centuries to come thought about the world. How the legacy of antiquity was distilled for the Middle Ages. As I say, I don't think I have done as good a job at delving into the details, paying attention to the minutiae as Salvatore has, but I'd like to think that we're engaged in much the same project, or projects of the same sort. And once again, I don't know if my project has been as fruitful, but I do think taking a look at some of the bits and pieces in John Malleus or the Excerpta Latina Barbari that we say, well, this is ridiculous, right? We have an account of the gods that doesn't correspond to any known mythology. We have this weird story of Perseus that comes to a climax when he turns Medusa's head on himself, and then he gets killed by his father-in-law Cepheus, or a weird account of Alexander the Great that begins with a virgin sacrifice and ends with him running off with Kandake, the queen of Ethiopia. Well, what are we to make of these? Well, we dismiss them as a rule. But I think that paying attention to these stories is helpful, right? It may not tell us much about Perseus or Alexander or the theology of the Greeks, but I think it does tell us where these things end up. And it does tell us how they got digested and prepared for consumption. But I think my elementary allusions are out of order there. But they get prepared for the consumption of Byzantine civilization. So we get some insight into where these seemingly ridiculous details come from. And I mean, we think that they're ridiculous. We think that they're oddities, but they had some meaning to somebody. And I think zeroing in on that point and figuring out what that significance was tells us something. It tells us something perhaps not about the day of the sources, the 6th century, but it tells us something about where the sources apparently come from, and that is the 4th century. And I think, Colin has mentioned that there seems to be some contemporary relevance for looking at these ridiculous tales, and I think that the 4th century and our century do have a lot in common, and I think that the thing that makes them common is that there seems to be an ideological divide, an apparently unbridgeable ideological gap. And it's not so much that it creates isolations as that it creates anxieties, this sort of period in society's history. And I think that the responses in terms of epistemologies, in terms of framing narratives is similar. And I think one of the interesting things that I learned in the course of this is that it is one thing for people to talk in abstract terms about what people are capable of and what might happen, what the dangers inherent of pursuing one person's program as opposed to another's are. But what people tend to listen to are stories of things that have actually happened. So history rather than theory. So I think there are a lot of theories floating around. For instance, I think we can draw out of Eusebius of Caesarea this idea that because Constantine is a friend of God, because he's a true believer, he's the first legitimate ruler of Rome. He's the first legitimate emperor. And all his predecessors, because they were tyrants, were, pardon me, because they were pagan, were tyrants. And there's a very strong hint that because they were pagans and tyrants, that is a very strong hint in Eusebius that they were all guilty of human sacrifice, or at least they were complicit in the whole structure of it. That's one thing, but you need to tell the stories, and that's what Bouttios does. That's what we see happening in John Malalas. I mean, I don't think he has any reason to invent tales of not just a series of rulers throughout history, all the way back to myth, sacrificing virgins to create civic tyches. But someone in the 4th century does. And the motive is to give a narrative substance to this largely theoretical claim that is made by Eusebius. So, I mean, I think once again, if we delve into the fine details of some of our works, we get a chance to look at how seemingly odd and erroneous works fit into these agendas for cultural and political change or stability.